Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tom to Education webinar for the 2023 Selective School Writing Test Review. I'm David Lee, Admin Manager at Pre-Uni New College Head Office, and it's my pleasure to be here with all of you. Okay, we have more than 700 audience at the moment.
Wow.
Okay. I understand that this is a very important time for our Year 5 students and parents as they prepare for the selective school exam next year. So Pre-Uni New College is here to support your child, and we will try our best to provide valuable insights so that we can help their exam preparation. So we have organized two sessions for this selective school post-exam webinar, and today is the first session for the writing test review. And we will have the second session for the reading test review, which will be tomorrow from 6:30 p.m. So yeah, please don't forget to register for tomorrow's webinar as well. Okay, so the purpose of tonight's webinar is to give you an in-depth overview of the 2023 selective school writing test. And we will go through the writing task which was asked for the past exam, including the recent 2023 exam paper. And we want to offer key tips and strategies to help you maximize the score in this important exam next year. Wow, we have 757 audience at the moment, so I don't think we can host some sort of Q&A session after the webinar tonight due to size of the audience. However, if you have any question, yes, please feel free to type them in the chat or send me an email, and I will carefully review your question and reply either through the email or posting Q&A session on the Cyber School website. So, yeah. Okay, so yeah, now I'd like to introduce our esteemed presenter, Ms. Kim Reid, for tonight's webinar. We are very honored to have Ms. Kim as a highly experienced educator and expert in selective school exam preparation for English reading and writing tests. Yeah, Kim has a very extensive background in teaching and helped numerous students at Pre-Uni to excel their exams. So, yes. So I think her expertise and dedication will make very perfect individual to lead us through this important session. So without further ado, yeah, please give a warm virtual welcome to Ms. Kim Lee. Hello, Kim.
Hi.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be with you. Very special good evening to my lovely Saturday MC1 and MC2 students who I already know. So if any of you are out there, hello. But also welcome to many, many other families and students who are working with us this evening. Now, David did mention that if you had any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. But with such a large audience, we can't respond to the chat online. And I would ask respectfully, particularly of the students, don't use the chat as an opportunity to catch up with your best friend. We are supposed to be focused on the task of deconstructing and learning about the selective high school writing task. So if you need to chat with your friends, you have to do that in your own time, not using this presentation. Okay, let's get going. So the writing test. The writing test enables us from the last 3 years to look at what are some general features that we're fairly sure that we can predict will be in the writing task and how you might prepare for those. But with any test, we cannot possibly predict all of it. So we need strategies to deal with what we are fairly sure will be predictably assessed and also strategies for dealing with the unknown elements of the text. So in general, we know that the writing task will be a topic about which you're given certain parameters and instructions, and you need to respond to that. We know that in general, the writing test has creativity of ideas and the ability to write effectively for a purpose and audience. And when you read the test designers' considerations on what they will be giving marks for, this adverb effectively comes up a lot. So they're looking for particular features in the text that are not just with it represented in the text, but they're represented effectively. And that's kind of the pivot point for us, because we can teach the students the kinds of features that we would like to see them include in their piece of writing. But it's only through practice and honing their skills that they're going to be able to use those features effectively. Now, I won't spend a lot of time tonight on grammar, punctuation, and spelling, because these are the technical skills of writing. They are critical and they are fundamental. You cannot write a good piece of writing without you being able to use the grammar, punctuation, and spelling necessary for that particular type of writing. But these are the technical skills. They are the easiest ones to learn. It's like learning your tables in mathematics. They're the basis. They're the building block skills that enable us to write effectively for a purpose and audience. So with your grammar, punctuation, and spelling, you just have to learn it, you have to practice it, you have to know it. And it has to reach a level that we describe as automaticity. That is, when you're writing, those skills are embedded so deeply from practice that you don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about those. You spend your mental effort on your ideas, your sentence construction, and things like that. Now, this little warning at the bottom here is kind of a heads up about what you shouldn't do. So it says students who do not address the topic in their writing, regardless of fluency or creativity, will receive low marks. And that's a little warning to you that this is not the kind of task you can take a pre-prepared text into. It would be lovely if we could do that. And I know that many of you are probably aware through either personal experience or you've just heard that one of the ways students prepare for exams like the high school certificate is to write lots and lots of practice essays and almost memorize those and take those into the test and kind of just produce them because they can predict the sorts of questions they're going to get and they've got a pre-prepared answer in their head. That's not going to work in this circumstance because the topic is unpredictable. Okay, so it's definitely very, very valuable to practice all different kinds of writing tasks and to perfect your skills in those different types of writing tasks. But you can't expect to go into this exam with a pre-prepared text in your head that you just reproduce on the day, because they're clearly warning you here that that's going to get you low marks. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a moment to read this little piece of text to yourself. Okay, so So this is a tiny grab, just because I only wanted to use one screen, from that a student wrote who was in my class for the previous group of students who sat the test in May. She was a very good writer, but this is the standard. And what you may not recognize, you might just read this and go, oh yeah, that's a nice piece of writing. But when you're a marker and you deconstruct this text to give it marks in particular criteria, there's so much just in this tiny little part, which is probably less than 10% of the entire text that she wrote. There are so many features that she would have got marks for just in this little piece of writing. Sentence variation, use of little devices like the little rhetorical question down here, the sentence variation of the short sentences flowing into the longer sentences, a little bit of use of dialogue, just the way that she builds the idea of this person in a test situation who's having difficulty answering some of the questions, and how she brings in the thoughts and feelings in her head of the possible disappointment her parents will feel if she doesn't do well on this test. Now, I said this is a very tiny part of the entire text that she wrote, but the standard is what I wanted you to have a look at. And for our students who are online with us tonight, have a think about whether you could write at this standard. And most likely the answer is right now, no, I probably couldn't. However, we've got almost 12 months. And in that 12 months, we have to move our students from whatever standard they're at now to something approximating this. Okay, so let's talk about the writing task. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is not about how to write a great piece of writing. It's about how to write a great piece of writing in 30 minutes with a particular prompt. This is different to a general piece of writing, because what's happening to you is you're writing under pressure and in 30 minutes. And 30 minutes might seem like a long time of itself, but when you're trying to produce a text that has a huge number of features represented in it and enables you to respond to the topic effectively and communicate your ideas effectively, it's a very, very short amount of time. And this is something that our students have to get used to. And it's hard, especially when the writing test environment is so very different to what they may be probably used to being at school. So when you create your text, you have no relationship with the marker at all. And this is different to school, where your teacher interacts with you about a piece of writing, talks to you about the piece of writing, enables you to draft, re-edit, reshape, fix the mistakes. You have no relationship with the marker, and they have no understanding of whether you're usually a good writer or not. It's what you put on the page on the day, and all you are to them is just a number. They don't know if you're a boy, a girl, whether you're in an OC class, whether you usually write at a very high standard, and quite honestly, they don't care. All you are to them is a text on a screen to be assessed against a set of criteria. So everything that you can do as a writer has to be represented in that one 30-minute task. This is your opportunity to show everything you can do. You don't get a second chance. You don't get to edit. You don't get to explain your piece of writing. It has to stand alone. Okay. So let's talk about the features that need to be in this piece of writing. The first thing is ideas. And the marking criteria for the ideas is the creation, selection, and crafting of ideas. So we can kind of break this down into two things. The what, which is the creation and selection of ideas. Okay, so the creation refers to how creative and original and you can come up with your ideas. And the selection refers to the deliberate inclusion or omission of ideas. Now, sometimes students struggle to come up with an idea, and we'll talk about ways you might work around that. But sometimes students have the opposite problem, and that is they have too many ideas, and they're all spinning around in their heads as soon as they see the prompt. So sometimes our job is not just to come up with ideas, but to pick very carefully the best idea that might come up from a whole heap of ideas that come into our heads. And then we get to the how, and this is the crafting of ideas. So here's this wonderful idea now. I've selected this fantastic idea. It's in my head. Now I have to craft that idea, get it out of my head and put it onto a piece of paper in 30 minutes because I know now it's a great idea. But at the moment, it's just a great idea sitting in my head. I have to get it out of my head and craft it skillfully and develop it onto a piece of paper. So someone who has no relationship with me whatsoever can realize what a great and recognize what a great idea it was. Okay. So with ideas, the student has to select, develop, and organize their ideas and communicate them effectively in writing. And this communicate effectively is a catchphrase for marking of writing tasks. So when the students are selecting their ideas, the ideas obviously must respond to the prompt or the stimulus. So they might go through a process of going, what could I write about? I've got this prompt in front of me. What can I write about? Then from that, they might refine that into what should I write about? Maybe I have to tone down what can I write about to what should I write about, and then finally come to a decision about what will I write about. Okay, what will my ideas be? And then I have to recognize that these ideas that I've selected are able to be developed. Okay, that I can elaborate and expand on these ideas to create a piece of text that responds to the prompt. And in order to do that, your ideas have to be substantial and robust. And coming up with substantial and robust ideas is difficult, okay? And the best piece of advice I can give you is to read extensively. And everyone will tell you you should read extensively for lots of reasons. But one of the best reasons to read extensively is that it enables you to capture ideas that you can modify and expand on and develop as your own ideas. Okay? If you read a very limited range of texts, or you spend an awful lot of time on video games, you'll write those kinds of ideas because they're the ones that will come into your head when you see the prompt. And as somebody who has marked a lot of writing tasks nationally, I can tell you can pick the video game watchers. Their texts just play out like video games, and they're usually very one-dimensional, very predictable, not robust. So I'm not here to tell you how to run your life and stay off the video games. I'm just here to suggest to you that that's not going to enable you to develop a big, round, meaty, robust idea. You can definitely play the video games, but make sure you expand your exposure to other kinds of texts as well. The other problem that students have is to come up with limited ideas that can't be developed. So they, rather than come up with one big robust idea that they can expand on, they come up with short, simple ideas, and then they have to add another idea, and then they have to add another idea. And then your text lacks cohesion, and it's more like a list than a cohesive piece of writing. And cliched ideas should be avoided. So you need to think about what cliched ideas might be. And I'll give you an example of one that I'm strongly recommending you stay away from. It doesn't matter whether it's a persuasive text or a narrative text or a hybrid text. Stay away from bullying as an idea, because bullying is such a cliched idea, and many students will use that as their theme. You do not want to be one of them. Okay, so let's talk about this organizing ideas. Okay, so now I've come up with my nice big robust idea. I have to expand it and organize it. Okay, so how do I set my ideas out so my text becomes logical and cohesive? The fewer ideas that you expand from your one big idea, the less problems you're likely to have with the piece of text. Okay? Stick to one big robust idea and expand on that, rather than a lot of really short, simple, underdeveloped ideas. And possibly the way to exemplify that is kids who write a text that has a lot of action. So they have a character that did this, then they did that, then they did the next thing, then they did the other thing and the final thing, and so on. That's not a robust idea. Okay, a robust idea is a character has one goal, one purpose, one idea, and you develop it and expand upon it, rather than having a list or a set of simple underdeveloped ideas. Okay, then you have to think about how you're going to structure and sequence the bits of your text to develop this big idea. And often we think of chronological as being the best way to do that. So we order ideas in a chronological order, and that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's a good idea to practice other structures as well, because chronological is likely to be the most common one. And one of your goals in this writing task is to differentiate yourself from what most kids or a lot of kids are doing. This is probably one of the few times in your life when you're going to be up against thousands of kids as your competition. Okay, this is not like being the best in your class or the best in your grade. This is up against thousands of kids who are all writing from the same prompt. So getting your ideas under control and well developed is one of the things that's going to make your text stand out from the hundreds of others that the same marker will be marking. And then to pull it all together and make it all logical and cohesive, we need the language of cohesion so that our ideas flow seamlessly to create one big idea. And I'm sure that many of you have heard this term cohesion. You must write a cohesive text. And you might sort of have a general idea that it means, oh, the text makes sense. And that's true. but it also needs to flow. It needs to read in such a way so that the marker reads it and they're not stopping and glitching because it doesn't make sense at different points or you have jumped over things. So cohesion's not that difficult. And sometimes you're doing it and you don't even realize that you're doing it. But some of the key strategies that you use to make your text cohesive are the use of synonyms. Okay. Now, think about it in your ideas. What are some key words that you're going to have to use a lot in your text? Because that's what your idea is based on. So let's say you were writing something about a forest. Before you start to write, scribble down a couple of synonyms, because if you're going to be using the word forest a lot in your text, it'll get very repetitive. So are there a couple of other words that I could substitute along the way just to break up that repetition of the use of the same word over and over again, but also to give without breaking the cohesion, because you can substitute here and the reader will clearly understand that you're still talking about the forest. Now, in a minute, we're going to get on to the 2023 prompt, which you probably have seen and you know it was about superheroes. So when you were going to write the superhero task, you were obviously going to be using the word superhero quite a lot in your text. So can I grab a few synonyms before I start to write that I might be able to use just to break up that repetition, but not to break the cohesion? All right, pronouns. Now, you use pronouns in your texts all the time, but pronouns are critical to giving your text cohesion. So they are useful for referring backwards to something previously mentioned, or even sometimes preempting something. So if you wrote a sentence like all these reasons, the these refers to the reasons you've already stated previously in the text. Okay, so the use of the these gives your text cohesion because it brings all the ideas that you've just put in place or the reasons that you've just put in place. And you make your text cohesive by pulling them together with a statement like this at the end of the paragraph or the end of the section of the text. Transitional words are really important, okay, in terming your text cohesion. Subsequently, in contrast, these words cue the reader to the relationship between your ideas that you're using to build your one main theme or your one main idea. So when you see in marking criteria that the text needs to be cohesive, a lot of this you already know how to do, but it's still a good idea to practice the using these cohesive devices. And these are just some examples of cohesive devices, so that you use them really effectively and that they really make sure that your text flows nicely for the reader. Okay. Now, one of the other criteria is to write effectively for the purpose and the audience. So purpose just is the reason or your intent of your writing. Now, you've only got one intention in your writing, and that is to get the maximum possible score. That is your intention in writing that piece of text, okay? But you also need a purpose that is determined by the prompt, okay? Sometimes the purpose is given to you, like write a persuasive text or write a narrative. But the test provider that has been used for the selective high school task in the last few years doesn't give you a purpose, okay? They suggest the purpose, but they don't say write a narrative or write a persuasive piece of text. So you have to look at the prompt and go, okay, what purpose is being suggested here? Okay, so maybe my purpose is to relate something that's exciting or inspiring. Now, this was probably pretty true for the superhero task. We wanted to write about a superhero that was exciting and enticing and relatable and inspiring. Okay. We might want to persuade the reader in our writing task, and we might want to persuade them to do something, think something, take some sort of action, or just to agree with us. These are all examples of the purpose of the text. Okay? The purpose might be to describe. The purpose might be to explain. The purpose might be to amuse. And the best writers mix them up. Okay? So even if the text says write a persuasive task, your good writers will include description, and they probably include some explanation, and they'll probably try to include some humor somewhere as well. So the purpose is very unlikely to be a single linear type of purpose. Okay? And what we've noticed in the last few years with the selective high school test is it's very much a multi-purpose task. Okay? So here we go with our superhero. Okay? The 2023 prompt asked you to write an email to a movie company. Probably something that most of you have never done, which is hosting a competition to invent a new superhero. Oh my goodness, invent a new superhero. As a result of the competition, you will be rewarded $1,000. Well, I think if you could invent a new superhero, you'd be getting a lot more than $1,000. However, that was the prompt. And it suggested these things might be included in your text. Describe how your superhero will look. That's pretty easy. Once I've invented one, I can describe it. Describing how they will use their superpowers. Now, they use the verb describing there, but I think what you'd actually be doing is explaining and demonstrating how they'd be using their superpowers, and explain why the audience will like them. So if we think again about purpose, this is clearly asking you to write a multi-purpose, or what we describe as a hybrid text. Okay, so your purpose will be to describe and explain, but overall your purpose is to describe and explain in order to persuade, because if we go back to the prompt, you are trying to win a competition. All right? You're trying to persuade this movie company executive that your superhero should be used in a movie. So you will be using description and you will be explaining things about your superhero, but you have to do it in such a way that you are persuading this movie company executive that yours is a great superhero and therefore you should be rewarded with the $1,000 prize. Now, what elements would I need to include in this piece of writing to fulfill those purposes? Could be any of these and many, many more. And you couldn't possibly include them all. So you have to think, in my superhero, would I need some events? Maybe. Would I need an introduction? Almost certainly. I need a character. Well, yeah, because the superhero is a character. Would I need some arguments? Yeah, I would. My arguments would be in a way also explanations of how and why my superhero is so wonderful, and so on. Okay, so when you get an extended prompt, you need to focus on the key words to enable you to form your ideas. And a strategy that I try to get my students to do, even though this is difficult to do under pressure, is before they start to write, to say to themselves in a single sentence, when somebody has read my text and I ask them the question, well, what was that about? They can give me one clear, simple sentence to say that what that text was about. Because if they have to go on and on and on to tell me what the text was about, my text has lacked cohesion and it has too many underdeveloped ideas. So I try to get my kids, as all these ideas are swimming around in their head, before they actually launch into writing the task, to say to themselves in one sentence, this text will be, and to make it as short a statement as possible. In a test situation, you are very much under time pressure, and that kind of tension often pressures you into just starting to get something down on the page. But you really cannot lose if you don't take a minute or 2 or 3 of your writing time to absolutely be clear that you've got this nice, big, strong, meaty idea before you start to write. Don't just start with I'm going to write about, and it'll come to me as I'm going. It won't. It'll become rambling and incohesive, and it'll have too many underdeveloped ideas. Okay, so with a superhero task, it's not enough to just go, I'm going to write about this superhero and she's going to be amazing. Yeah, right. That's not an idea. That's what we might call a kernel or a starting point for an idea, but it's not an idea, and it's certainly not going to lead you to an idea that's robust and different and better than what most other kids are going to be able to do. Okay. Now, the task in this case asked you to write an email to this movie company. An email is not a purpose. An email is a form of writing. Okay, and in the previous 2 prompts that the students have done in 22 and 21, the form of writing was given to them just as it was in this prompt. So this one was write an email. The previous year it was write a diary entry. The previous year it was write a newspaper report. The form of the writing is not the purpose, because an email could be imaginative, informative, explanatory, persuasive, and a mixture of all those kinds of elements. So the form is important. You can't ignore it. If it says write an email and you don't write an email, well, you're obviously not going to maximize your marks. But the emphasis is not on the form, it's on the content of the email. Okay. The criteria also say that you need to write for perspective and audience. Now, your audience was given to you in this particular task. It was a movie production company, all right? The audience was given to you in the newspaper article. It was readers of a newspaper, okay? And the perspective is someone trying to convince a movie company about a product, and that product is a new particular superhero, so that they can win a competition. So if you take that information from the prompt and you think, well, what kind of writing are they really looking for here? It's a pitch, right? You are pitching your idea to a movie company so that you can win $1,000 and your superhero can become the next big thing in movies. Okay? Now, if you've never read a pitch, you're not really going to know much about them. So that comes back to what I was saying about read extensively. And that doesn't mean, oh, I've read all the Harry Potters, I've read extensively. Go for it. Read all the Harry Potters, read all the Rico Riordan's, read all that stuff. But that's one genre. You got to read them and a whole range of other genres, because the more different types of writing you read, the more you'll know how to craft ideas for that type of writing. Now, if you've never read a pitch, you're going to be able to do this task, but you're not going to be able to do it as effectively as if you've already got some ideas about how to structure and organize a pitch. Okay, now it said in the instructions that you would probably describe your superhero. And I imagine that many students went, well, that's not too difficult. I can write a description. And of all the different styles and types of writing that I have seen students do well, description is right at the top of the list. And that's because it's easy. And it's actually quite easy to do it well. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it and you shouldn't do it well, but it does mean that being able to write good description is not going to differentiate you from the pack, because many students in that year 6 range can write description very effectively. And you saw some of it in the text that I showed you at the very beginning of the session. So for this task, if you spent most of the text writing the description of your superhero, you will have disadvantaged yourself, because the descriptions that most kids would write would be of a high quality, but they will have other features in their text as well. So to differentiate yourself and make your writing stand out, you would have looked for the less predictable features of your superhero to describe. The worst thing you could have done was a top to tail description of every feature of your superhero, because that just becomes bland and meaningless. And you should have focused on, or the students who did this task needed to focus on describing the features of the superpower of the superhero that are important to their superpower. So if they need to fly, you might have described their wings. If they need to be powerful and strong, you might have described features of them that make them powerful and strong. The reader does not want to know, nor would you get great marks for describing every single feature of your superhero. The other suggestion was that you talk about the powers of your superhero. And obviously, this is pretty obvious, because what is a superhero but differentiated from a regular human being? It's the powers, okay? So how would you talk about the powers? Well, what seems obvious is you would explain them. My superhero can do this and that and the other thing. I would suggest that's going to be very, very standard. So rather than just an explanation, bring the reader into the text, show them the superpowers in action, put them in a scene or scenario. So it's a form of narrative being written to persuade that the superhero's powers are amazing. So rather than just a bland, dry explanation of what the superhero can do, show the reader the superhero powers in action. Something like, imagine the gasp of the audience when he swoops in and, using his extraordinary strength, lifts the speeding car just as it's about to collide with a house full of children or a school full of children or whatever. We're explaining the powers, we're showing what the powers can do, but we're doing it in a less predictable and much more engaging manner. Okay? The other thing you were asked to write about is, why will the audience like this? Now, we said this is a pitch. And when you pitch to a movie director, they're interested in the audience wanting to come and see their movie and obviously pay money to see the movie. Why will the audience like them? Well, if you go and write something like, the audience will like Captain Ultra because he is brave and kind and he always finds ways to help others. Well, you're fulfilling the task of why the audience will like them, but you are not writing effectively. Captain Ultra's action stunts and his vibrant costumes are sure to win audience appeal, but it is the character behind the costume that will really captivate the audience. You're doing the same thing. You just, the way that you're telling the movie producer about why the audience will like them. The audience will be willing Captain Ultra on as he races to save yet another human from certain death, but they will also feel great sympathy for him when they learn that he has lost his parents in a tragic accident. Sorry, I borrowed that one from the Superman idea, but that's not the point. The point is how you fulfill the task of writing about why the audience will like them. So your message is the audience will like Captain Ultra because he is brave and kind and whatever. Now, that's my message. How can I write that without just writing a bland, one-dimensional description of the, why the audience will like Captain Ultra or whoever it is? Okay? But let's raise the tension as well. The audience will feel genuine fear as Captain Ultra is stalked by the notorious villain Nitro Woman. Don't forget the persuasion. It's a pitch. The movie director's got to want to know about this superhero so they can create a great movie. Audiences will leave the cinema buzzing about Captain Ultra and racing off to urge their friends to go and see the movie. Why will the audience like them? Find different ways to put that message across than the most predictable way that a great many students will do it. So really, this text, this email to this movie producer was a pitch. And it needed to have persuasive elements, it needed to have informative elements, it needed to have creative elements because you had to create your superhero in the first place. But the whole thing is really a piece of fiction. Okay? There would be opportunities for you to use description. There would be opportunities to use persuasive devices, and don't be afraid in something like a pitch to ramp up the emotional language. You're trying to persuade a movie producer. These people live in the world of hyperbole, right? Captain Ultra is characterized by his dominant qualities of courage, strength, and intelligence. Audiences will be delighted by. This movie will be suitable for family, appeal to this, have action scenes, etc., etc. Once you've decided about your superhero, it all comes down to how you craft your ideas to fulfill the purpose of the text, which is to convince this movie director about your particular superhero. Okay, now, this is kind of a summing up of what kind of things the marker will be looking for to sum up Okay, and you'll notice that I've highlighted this communicative effectiveness is in everything that markers are trained to look for in a piece of text. Okay, they need to, they're looking for your ideas to be coherent, creative, well structured, and communicated effectively. So if we go back to what we talked about very early in this chat, what is the ideas that I am going to work on? I've got these ideas. I know what my superhero is going to be like. And now I have to communicate that effectively using things like the way that we pitch our ideas to the movie director. Some things that come up quite often when students are taught to write. And there's often a sense that you need to put in a lot of devices into your piece of writing. Literary techniques, devices, narrative devices, figurative language, you name it. It's all said, oh, you need to put all these things into your piece of writing. And that's not necessarily bad advice, but it can make your text very contrived and clunky if you try to jam in every possible device and technique that you've ever learnt. So the practice that you do with your writing is to practice all these different kinds of literary devices and narrative techniques and what have you, but then to practice using them so that they have real impact on your ideas. You choose the ones that are going to enable you to combine your words and phrases to convey your ideas in such a way that they have an impact on the reader. So the marker will not give you marks for demonstrating that you know these techniques. The marker will give you marks because you selected and used them to communicate effectively. And it might be that you use none because the way that you are developing your ideas does not require any. Would you lose marks because you didn't demonstrate any? No, because you used other strategies to communicate your ideas effectively. But here's a few that are pretty universal, that doesn't really matter what the prompt is. These ones are very, very likely that you would be able to use them. And varying and alternating the length of kinds of sentences is a pretty easy one that works in almost any type of writing and will work for almost any type of prompt. So strategically crafting some longer and shorter sentences and varying sentence beginnings is usually will make your piece of writing better. Okay, and that's an easy one that you can practice, and it'll come to you automatically to do it. And if we think back to the example text that I showed you from at the very beginning of the presentation, that she did that automatically. She didn't have to think, oh, have I got some short ones, some long ones, some pithy ones, some complex ones. She had practiced sentence variety for 12 months, and it was just naturally how she wrote. Include some sensory detail. Now, there was a clear piece of advice in the superhero prompt that you would describe your superhero. And students will go to visual description. But there's lots of things about your superhero that may not be just to do with their appearance, okay? Can you include some sensory details to bring out the mental images? Is there something about the way the superhero uses their voice? Is there some kind of the sound that they make? Any kind of inclusion of some sort of sensory detail can actually expand on your description beyond just the visual. Okay, so maybe in this one, it was the reaction of the audience to your superhero, the clapping, the cheering, whatever it might be. And you don't need to include mountains of this stuff. One example of something beyond the visual, okay? Sound, smell, probably not taste unless you're writing about food or something that should go in your mouth. But sound is almost always present, and smell can be a really good way to include a sensory description as well. Okay, so we're nearly there. Do I have to stick in a couple of metaphors? Surely I need some similes. Oh, maybe some personification. What about some dialogue? How many adjectives have I put in? How many adverbs have I put in? It's like literary devices. Absolutely great if you can include some of these techniques in your piece of writing. But it's like the literary devices. You will not be rewarded for them unless they are used effectively. All right? It's not if you go into the test with the stuck in your head, oh, I've got to include a simile and I must include some personification and I've got to have at least 7 adjectives and 22 adverbs and so on. Your piece of writing will be very contrived, clunky and formulaic, and the marker will read hundreds of clunky, formulaic texts that are written to not to be communicatively effective, but to try and show that you understand figurative language and you can do personification and you can include literary devices and you can include dialogue and you can punctuate it correctly and so on. Don't use those techniques. Practice them. Definitely practice them before the test, but only bring them in if they are right for your piece of writing at that point in time. You don't have to use them. They're devices. Okay. I'm going to go past that and just finish off because we're running out of time. Having a really rich, well-rounded vocabulary is important. It's fundamental to any good piece of writing because effective communication comes from choice of words. Okay, that's pretty fundamental. So learning a lot of so-called good words or descriptive words or colourful words or rich vocabulary or however you might describe it is really important. But what's even more important is being able to select very precisely and effectively the vocabulary for your particular point in your particular sentence, in that particular paragraph, for that particular prompt. So learning vocabulary has a lot of value, but learning to use that vocabulary in a very nuanced and precise way is far more important. So in a way, a good selection of words that you can craft into a piece of writing really effectively is more valuable than a huge selection of words that you just know, but you can't use them with precision and nuance and craft them. Because again, kids who stick in good words in their text stand out as not being effectively communicating. And this is our final point. We didn't talk about grammar, punctuation and spelling because I told you at the beginning, these are things that you can learn. They are skills, they have rules, you can learn to use them, and you must create an error-free text. Do not think that the marker is going to forgive you if you accidentally leave out a comma or you accidentally change tense in a sentence or you misuse your pronouns. They will not forgive you because these are skills that are fundamental to writing. If you were doing a maths test and you accidentally said that 3 7s were 25, the marker's not going to forgive you and go, they probably really know that. They'll just mark you wrong. And it's the same with grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Know it and use it effectively and don't make any errors. Okay, that was a bit of a negative note to end on, but it's an important note to end on, I guess, as well. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of our chat for this evening. I hope that was of some value and all the very best of luck. And I hope that your students, or if you're the parents, or the students, if you are the students, work hard on your writing, and I'm sure that you will do well. Okay, thanks everyone.